Hi, I'm Mike Weaver, one of the product owners here at Quadrotech, and I'm here today with Tony Redmond. We're going to talk about tenant-to-tenant migrations.
Yeah, it's a great conversation to have.
It's something we've been spending a lot of time with, especially with our clients. So a lot of our clients are used to doing on-prem migrations up into Office 365, but with the merger acquisition landscape of the business world, we've really been seeing a lot of requests for tenant-to-tenant projects. So it's a great topic to discuss today.
Yeah, I think it probably reflects the growing maturity of Office 365. I mean, it's only 8 years in use, right? But for the first couple of years, the only kind of migrations that really happened were email migrations. And it was simple. Let's get some stuff off an on-prem mailbox server and get it over to Office 365. No great problem. But as we've seen Office 365 mature, the platform mature, you've seen a lot more data go onto it. You've seen SharePoint become more important. So there's a lot of SharePoint migrations going on. And I think we're seeing a tailing off of the Exchange workload going across. All the easy stuff is done. And at the same time then, because companies have been using it, bigger companies, and really it's only the large enterprises, and you can put any definition you want about it, it's 10,000 seats or whatever. Really, it's the large enterprises that are now using the cloud who are realizing that as part of business transformation, they may have to change. They may need to add a unit, they may need to let a unit go, they may want to merge with another company. All of these very common business events, but they now need to factor Office 365 in it. And the other factor that we would throw into it, which I think is fascinating, is the growing array of data types that are in Office 365 as new applications have joined, and the interconnectivity of those data types. Because if we look at the new Office 365 apps, Teams is a great example. These apps, they do generate their own data, they have their own data sources, they have their own APIs, but they also borrow heavily from other components inside Office 365, Exchange and SharePoint, OneDrive, whatever. And so it means that when you're thinking about doing tenant-to-tenant migration, some of the old thinking that we talk about, which said, let's just transfer mailboxes from this business to that business, or let's take all these SharePoint files and move them over there. That thinking is null and void, totally invalid in the new world. And that's a business challenge. It's a technology challenge. And also for ISVs like Quadrotech, I think it's a challenge to come up with tools, the methods, the advice that you can share with customers who want to do that kind of transformation.
Absolutely. And really, when we're helping our clients prepare for these projects, that's where we use our reporting product and other items so we can get an inventory very quickly in the project. Because that's been, I think, one of the largest challenges for our clients when they engage with us is, well, how much data you have? What do you have? What are your users using?
Yep.
And very quickly with our reporting product, we can do these inventories and be able to come back with a pretty robust plan. And obviously it's very difficult with all the workloads, but be able to bring a migration plan together.
Yeah, but obviously it's a great way of getting information together. But let's be blunt here. No technology that I know of today or have ever met in the past will automate everything.
No.
Right,
it comes to project managers and good IT people coming together
and
make
lawyers.
Yes, that's true.
And lawyers, and accountants. I mean, my gosh, it's a fully faceted team that goes out there to do a merger and acquisition. So I think the challenge is not so much to try and do everything. I think the challenge is to do two things. Firstly, automate as much as possible, okay, and secondly, transfer the data as quickly as possible, because time is money. And in merger and acquisition projects and divestitures, they all seem to take a tremendous amount of time. And sure, you're not going to fix the legal issues and the financial issues and whatever, but you can sure as hell go after the technical issues and the Office 365 issues, which is, I think, what the target should be.
Makes sense, because hours add up, especially when you're talking about even a couple of gigs an hour can be a days on a project with a
right.
transfer.
And when you look at Office 365 and you see some of the stuff that's happening now, I mean, we've now got multi-geo.
Yep.
So it's not a case that you can depend on all the data is going to be in a single geography. I mean, maybe that's going to make things easier if you say, well, it's only the French subsidiary that's involved. Well, that's good. But on the other hand, if you've got some users in France, you've got some users in Germany, you've got some users in the US, and all of those users are affected. Now firstly you got to know about them,
Yep.
which is what you get from the reports. But secondly, then you're going to figure out what tactic you're going to take. Maybe it's a case you're going to consolidate their data back into one particular Office 365 data center region, which would be okay provided it's done for a small amount of time. Because otherwise you might run into all sorts of data residency and sovereignty issues and all the rest of it. So the point here is that the old way of thinking, which is just move data from A to B, it really needs a fundamental rethink. I think if anybody listening to this, if they're going to get involved in a merger, an acquisition, divestiture, that type of project, any sort of, put it like this, any sort of restructuring of an Office 365 tenant, they got to know where the data is, they got to know who the users are, they got to know what the business wants to do, and they've got to be able to go then and execute it across the full spectrum of Office 365 apps. And there are some real technical difficulties there, as you guys have been finding out as you've been building them.
Absolutely, and there's certain things that don't move too, which really adds to the business complexity. Is some critical items that users are used to enjoying, they don't quite move sometimes. So even consulting and guiding clients on that can be.
So
difficult.
what kind of items are you talking about there?
So the biggest one is Teams. That's been one of the biggest problems. I think that's the public example. Quadrotech's been doing some work to do some dial tone recovery during the migration, but we still don't have chat histories and things like that. Microsoft's made commitments that that's going to change hopefully in 2019, and we're sitting there ready for that.
So it's a lack of APIs.
It's a lack of APIs in that case. Yep.
Yeah, and in fact, I don't think Quadrotech is the only type of ISVs that's affected by this. You look at the backup ISVs.
Yep.
They are totally affected by the lack of APIs. It's not a case that you can take a backup of a complete Office 365 tenant.
Yep.
And then go and restore it. That doesn't work. You can take a backup of mailboxes or SharePoint, but then you can't combine them together into Office 365 groups, into Teams, into Planner, into Yammer. It's just, the list goes on and on and on. So it's a really complex area.
Absolutely.
But are you getting good response from Microsoft at all about solving the gaps, the functionality gaps with the APIs?
Yeah, so Microsoft, they're certainly aware of this problem. I think if you talk to any of the product team or any of the forums, you certainly see very high level input from Microsoft and engagement to solve these issues. We're expecting some very good things in 2019, and we're sitting here ready to code against them and be ready to bring these solutions. We've got loads of projects that are heavily using Teams, and as you mentioned, for the merger and acquisition space, companies want that return on investment as soon as possible, so they want to integrate as quickly as possible. So
what are companies doing today with Teams? Are they just leaving stuff on let's say the host tenant?
I think it depends on the reason for the data. So organizations that have some really strict regulations where they may need it for e-discovery, sometimes they're doing collections, so e-discovery collections to preserve that data, and then unfortunately
they're using the compliance records created by Teams inside Exchange.
Exactly.
And I think that's interesting because those records are incomplete.
Yes, they are.
They are incomplete. Just a very simple example, the likes.
Yep.
Likes. And the reason why that's important for an e-discovery perspective is that a like indicates that somebody positively saw a message and positively responded to a message. So for example, if this was a message about a potential breach of company regulations or financial regulations or something like that, and there was a case of a conspiracy forming, that's very firm evidence that somebody participated in the conspiracy.
Well, it's the same as replying okay, right? I like it and I acknowledge that message. It's been
okay, but it is really important that people understand that those compliance records are just copies of messages, nothing else. None of the metadata, it's just the messages.
Yep.
Right. So that's kind of interesting. Do people find any problem with Planner?
Planner, the adoption on Planner is interesting, right? Because organizations have either heavily adopted it or they haven't. The enterprise clients that we've worked with haven't had heavy adoption. There's been pockets.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's data that isn't migrating either, which is a disappointment. And then we have organizations that have paused accepting Planner or adopting Planner until they're in their new tenant, knowing that these items don't move. And that's affecting Teams adoption and other adoption too, because they know this move is coming, so they don't want to enable the technology so they don't have to move it.
So they actually put a pause on the deployment of Teams, Planner, that kind of stuff?
Absolutely.
Okay, that must have some interesting side effects from time to time.
It does, because you're trying to move, things forward and bring a company together, but then you've got half the company that you're not allowing new technology for because it won't move, because it won't come over correctly. So some organizations have paused that.
And the whole aspect of identities, I mean, we've got a good handle on that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And identity management for migration is a whole other problem too, and how that's tackled. And every organization is different. So some companies come in and they want everyone to move to the new standard in an acquisition. So the old identity is kind of left behind in aspects that are moved over. And then sometimes in a true merger, you'll try to merge the directories either with a directory tool or some advanced AD Connect module or whatever have you. And
again, in the old days when it was just a matter of adding a new proxy address to an email, a new email proxy address to an Active Directory record, I mean, that's not acceptable anymore.
No, it's completely different now. It's far more complex.
Right, because you've got all the UPN has got to be redone over. And I assume that also has a huge impact on things like, for example, Azure AD conditional access policies, on stuff like information protection, all of that kind of stuff. So I think what we're saying here is that the directory synchronization, the directory migration, making sure that the directory works in the right way when everything gets across to a migrated Office 365 tenant, it's not just as simple as moving accounts around.
Not at all, and especially in large organizations, it's integrating with HRIS systems and ensuring that all is managed correctly. It's not as you said, it's just not as simple as just adding an object. It needs to be added correctly in the correct manner for the migration, for pre-move, the migration, and then the actual management of the object after the migration.
Do we think things are going to get any simpler or more complex?
I think we learn more as we keep going in these more complex projects. So we used to be kind of lucky as technologists when we had these enterprise projects where one would be on-prem and one would be Office 365. And as you said, those days are gone. So as we learn more and as we automate more, which you also mentioned earlier in the discussion here, how important that is, I think it's still as complex, but the way we automate and handle it, it allows the administrator to focus on other aspects of the project. So it is simpler, and as we add more and more services, I think it'll get more complex, but I think Microsoft has learned some lessons from Teams and how quickly that adopted that migration has to be part of any product development now, because it's I think the concern was, are they going to take it and go to AWS with it or change to another provider? So migration wasn't really as big of a concern, but now we have very large corporations saying, well, we do huge merger, acquisition, and divestiture activity. We need to be able to move within your product.
Do you think this is always going to be a very costly exercise?
It's very labor intense, the experience, and look at the business side too, right? If you look at the lawyers that are working on merger acquisition work instead of maybe simpler legal activities, that's a higher cost event. You look at the finances behind it. The IT resources are very complex as well. The planning and what goes into these projects, I think, is always going to
get rid of the project management.
No, because you're never going to get rid of the human element, and this is so.
Well, you can reduce the human element and reduce cost with better automation.
You can, absolutely, but what you have to remember with these merger and acquisition projects is people's jobs are changing in the middle of this. The technology teams that you're involved with are engaged. They're coming together to a new team. There's always going to be that human cost that's there. And that's where good project management and change agents can help deal with that aspect of it. So the technologists can kind of do a little more of that piece as well. But as technologists, we have to acknowledge that in these projects, that the amount of time that goes in, because we're affecting these people's day-to-day job with this project. When we're done that project, they may be in a completely new role and really stressed when they come to work on Monday morning. All right, so Tony, thank you for joining us today.
Perfect, yeah.
And if people want to learn more about what we're doing here at Quadrotech, you can go ahead and visit our website, www.quadrotech-it.com.